This week, we expose what's really happening behind closed doors on college campuses where students are turning against their own classmates. What transformed our universities from centers of learning into breeding grounds for extremism? And why are billion-dollar donors finally pulling their support? The answers might shock you. Plus, we'll reveal the 50-year shift that no one saw coming until it was too late. You don't want to miss it. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on another fun-filled episode of the Brian Nichols Show. Today, we're jumping right into things from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios, and we're discussing all things craziness in college. Specifically, we're going to be talking about a lot of college students' reaction. And today, by the way, elephant in the room, we are recording on October 7th. So yes, a lot of, I would say, more progressive-leaning college students and their reaction to the 10/7 massacre that took place over in Israel at the behest of Hamas and all the other wonderful, terrorist organizations over there. They seem to get along so well. And unfortunately, a lot of folks here in the continental US of A really have no understanding that when they are aligning themselves quite literally with terrorist organizations, that they are the folks that would be in those terrorist organizations' sites were they in the same location. So there seems to be a disconnect. And I don't know, is it that I'm an old fuddy-duddy? I just don't know what's going on campus anymore. It might be. So to discuss what is in fact happening on campus and how the heck we got here, joining us from Campus Reform is the editor-in-chief, get it right, Nichols, Zachary Marschall. Welcome here to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
Good. Great to be here.
Great to have you on, Zachary. Looking forward to discussing all things, yes, insanity on college campuses. I'm about a decade removed from my tenure when I was on a college campus. No, it has been a decade. Getting old there, Zachary. And definitely feeling it when I wake up. All those old football injuries, man, they just come out of the woodwork here. But let's talk about what's happening on campus today. But before we do that, Zachary, introduce yourself here to the Brian Nichols Show audience, and what's your role as editor-in-chief over at Campus Reform look like? What are you doing over there?
Yeah, so I'm editor-in-chief of Leadership Institute's Campus Reform. My team publishes reports on leftist bias and abuse in higher education daily on our website, campusreform.org. We cover a range of topics, but for the last year, the story coming out of higher education and the national story has been campus antisemitism. This is something we've been sounding the alarm on for years, and we've been reporting on since we were founded in 2009. But it wasn't until we saw the swell of support for the Hamas terrorists last year that Americans woke up to what has been brewing on college campuses this whole time.
You said 2009. This kind of all started, this anti-Semitism dog whistle on these college campuses. Give us some of the historical context there, Zachary. What are some of the things you've been seeing on campus here for well over a decade and a half at this point?
Yeah, so if we want to look at why we have professors, especially at Columbia University and other places, supporting students and helping them launch activist rallies and demonstrations on campus against Israel, against Western values, we really have to go back about 50 years to understand that is when higher education really took a deep turn, and it went away from what we traditionally understand learning to be, and it went into like this postmodern critique, and it went into anything that criticizes the West or is anti-American is somehow now a mark of sophistication. So for about 40 or 50 years, we had a new wave of professors teach this and train the next generation of TAs, of students, and the next generation of professors. And this was all happening under the radar because the old guard of professors was slowly retiring over this period. And we didn't reach a real critical mass point until about 10, 15 years ago, when all of a sudden there was no one left but these radical leftists. And they have been the ones who have controlled the hiring and firing and promotion committees. They're the ones that decide what counts as peer-reviewed publication, what counts as good dissertation. And we've gotten collectively have become this echo chamber in higher ed, where anything that goes against Western values, and Israel is a symbol of that in their opinion, is something A, to be torn down, and B, if you tout, you're going to get a good job in academia. And that is the bulwark people on campus who are pro-Israel, who are Jewish, or who are just plain patriotic are up against every day.
Yeah, well, and it used to be, right? I remember back when I was in college, we would be like, well, let's be real, folks. The ultimate slap in the face of reality for these goofballs is going to be when they go out into the real life, into the real world, and they realize that this insanity that they're bringing into the classroom or onto campus doesn't fly outside of academia. It doesn't fly when you go into the business environment. It doesn't fly when you go into your local communities. And yet, Zachary, this is where I get a little nervous. It seems to, in some areas, start to be flying. Right now, there definitely has been some pushback. Specifically, you look at the DEI practices and a lot of these larger corporations out there. Robbie Starduck is going across the country, making companies like John Deere, Tractor Supply, I can say it, as well as Toyota and a bunch of other organizations start to reevaluate or outright scrap their DEI practices. But for, you mentioned the time frame, about that decade and a half time period, the DEI mentality really just, pedal to the metal with zero, well, maybe a little bit, but almost zero pushback. And a lot of that was due to folks being afraid of being called a bigot, being called racist or intolerant, right? Like, these are all the attacks that our friends on the left will toss at anybody who questions the narrative, Zachary. And I guess we look at where we are today. We've seen some pushback, right? Like, it looks like some folks in real world are starting to stand up and fight back, but is it enough? Like, is the pendulum swinging back far enough that it's going to maybe help change the way campuses are looking at, and I'm just going to say, the DEI perspectives within the confines of their college campus? Are we going to see a change? Are we seeing a change? You're seeing a lot more than me. You tell me, what do you see?
Yeah, I think we are going to see a change, but I think this is a very gradual process. So we have to think in terms of years. And I've been saying now for a while that I think this is going to be an end of the decade result. So I'm not expecting anything right now, but I think in about 10 years or 5 to 10 years or so, we're going to see real change. And there have been a couple positive steps happening this year that indicate that. One, the rollback of DEI, as you mentioned. DEI is the complex of programming and ideology on campuses that facilitates a lot of this vitriolic and divisiveness happening in higher ed, anti-Semitism being one of those things. And we're seeing now employers reject that. In addition to companies you mentioned, we've also seen Google say, absolutely not, we're not going to handle it. We're not going to tolerate any of your protests. Now law firms are now screening applicants for their participation in anti-Semitic rallies. And about a third of employers now are screening for whether or not you participated in anti-Semitic activity on campus in job interviews. This is positive change in the private sector.
Hey folks, I want to take a moment to talk about something that has truly changed my life, and that is Cardio Miracle, our incredible studio sponsor. Now, I'll be honest, when I first heard about Cardio Miracle and their claims about improving heart health, I was skeptical. But after using it for just about 2 months, I was absolutely blown away by the results. First, my blood pressure went from being consistently around 140/90 to a much more healthier and manageable 120/80. And my resting heart rate dropped from the low 70s to the high 50s. And I couldn't believe it. But the benefits didn't stop there. I started sleeping better, and I felt more energized at the gym, and my heart felt the best it's felt in years. And it's not just me. Hundreds of you, our amazing listeners, have reached out to share your own incredible experiences with Cardio Miracle. So, what is Cardio Miracle, and how does it work? It's a carefully crafted supplement that harnesses the power of nitric oxide to support optimal heart function. So, by increasing nitric oxide levels in your blood, Cardio Miracle helps relax your blood vessels, improve circulation, and it protects your heart from damage. It's like giving your heart the support it needs to function at its best. And here's the best part. We've got an exclusive offer just for you, our loyal listeners here at the Brian Nichols Show. When you head over to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout, you'll get an extra 15% discount on your order. Plus, with their 100% money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So, if you're ready to take control of your heart health and experience the life-changing benefits of Cardio Miracle for yourself, just click the link in the show notes or video description. Trust me, your heart will thank you. And don't wait another day to prioritize your health. Join the tens of thousands of folks who have already discovered the Cardio Miracle difference. Head to cardiomiracle.com now and use code TBNS for 15% off your order. Your journey to a happier and healthier heart starts today. And now, let's get back to the show.
Within higher ed, I think the best hope we've seen all year is Jonathan Levin. He is the new president of Stanford University. He just gave his inaugural speech about 2 or so weeks ago, and he said that higher education is not about activism, it is about higher learning. That one passage is a complete rejection of the last 50 years that I just described, which we have never heard before. And as he said that, many universities are now implementing institutional neutrality policies, which say that the universities will not take positions on issues that do not affect them directly. And
whoa, I got to pause you really quick, Zachary, because that's huge.
Mhm.
Because back not even a few months ago, we had Phil Magnus here on the show, and Phil Magnus was talking about how a lot of institutions of higher education, they would actually not only brag about the discrepancy of progressive versus conservative teachers on their campus, professors on their campus, but it became almost a selling point. They were like proud of it. They're like, yeah, we don't have a diversity of thought here on campus. So the fact that not only are we seeing that switch over to not to the other side, but rather just saying, you know what? No, we're not activists regardless. We're just saying, you know what? Let's teach kids stuff that's important instead of trying to turn them into little card carrying, members of what Antifa.
Well, terrorists. They LARP being terrorists. There's one anecdote I can give you that I think explains the process that's caused this pushback. So during her congressional testimony earlier this year, former Columbia President Manoush Shafik was presented with a dictionary that was made on her campus by students that included a bunch of crazy terms that go into gender ideology, but also use the word Ashkenazi normativity, which is a derogatory thing they made up on the left to further criminalize being Jewish. When presented with the dictionary, the president of Columbia refused to believe it was real. She said, oh, these must be typos. Oh, they probably don't know what they're talking about. She had no clue or context that these are real ideas, that these words are representative of the ideas that have been taught for the past 40 years.
How does somebody in college, like that's a president of the college, not know what their kids at school are learning?
We only see what we want to see, and these administrators, the board members, the presidents, they only wanted to see what they wanted to see, and they refused to believe that the people protesting on their campuses were pro-terrorist. They thought, stupidly, the best of people who would overturn everything that we stand for. And so what we're seeing here with the neutrality policies, with Levin's speech, is that the people at the top are finally realizing that they were dangerously naive and wrong this whole time, and they're starting to wake up. And once you do that, you realize there is not two sides to this issue. There's only one side, and that is the pro-American, pro-traditional value side when it comes to education.
Zachary, what about the true believers? Because there's lots of them, right? So what about both the true believers in the activist camp, but also those true believers who you rightfully pointed out, they took over the halls of academia as professors, as TAs, right? And now as administrators. And they're the ones who've been leading these institutions that we used to look to as this is the next step in life, right? You go to elementary school, you go to middle school, you go to high school, and what's next, right? Either your trade school or you go to college, right? That was always the next step. And now we see these institutions they're entirely made up from an administrative, faculty, and a teacher assistant perspective from these little activists. So Zachary, what about those true believers?
They are making careers out of their own grievances and out of their own personal interests. And sometimes their personal interests includes killing, raping, and torturing Jews, as did many other people's interests in Germany during the 1930s and 1940s. These are people who are influenced by radical ideologies that have been indoctrinated into them and brainwashed into them for decades. Higher education forgot that you're supposed to teach about topics, not to brainwash them into students. And they are the result of that. So they are leading a bunch of people who are, I think, lost in life. I think a lot of the people in the crowds we're seeing in Columbia today don't know who they are, and they have no sense of their own self. And they are clinging onto an ideology they barely understand. They can't name the river or the sea in the chant. They don't know where it is. They couldn't find Israel on a map. And the people leading them know this because they are zealots who will just corral the masses into overturning their institutions and hopefully the destruction of the Jewish people.
Why are Jews the target? Like, and this is the question I know lots of folks have, right? Is it just seems like these issues don't really become issues until it becomes the Jewish populations that are being targeted specifically. Now, this isn't to say that the Jewish populations have not been targeted. Obviously, Jewish populations have been targeted for generations at this point, but specifically in the context of where we are today, the DEI conversation, right, Zachary? It's been going on for several decades at this point, but we really haven't seen a true pushback to this until October 7th. Like your Bill Ackmans of the world, right? Who he's like, yeah, I donate a gazillion dollars to my alma mater. But now I'm starting to question that. Do I want to give a gazillion dollars to a bunch of anti-Semitic kids who I don't, and again, I'm not saying that they're not anti-Semitic, Zachary, because they are, but I don't know if the anti-Semitism is rooted from anti-Semitism. So rather, is it rooted in this DEI perspective? Because again, if you're always searching for a victim, then you can apply that to almost any circumstance, just as a lot of these little drones that have been going out and protesting on these college campuses have been doing over the past few years, right? They're not protesting necessarily Jewishness or Judaism or being anti-Semitic through a hatred of Jews, but rather they're trying to apply this Jewish-Palestinian conflict into the DEI perspective, right? You have your aggressors and you have your oppressors, then you hear versus the victim class and the oppressed. And this gobbledygook, mashed potatoes brain mindset has carried over into a lot of different areas. It just seems that it reared its ugly head during the preceding events from October 7th, 2023 to where we are a year later as we're recording this today. And that was, it seems, what woke up a lot of folks. My former congresswoman up in New York State, Elise Stefanik, holding all these different college presidents to account and making them put the words of the college, but also the words of themselves behind the insanity with no ability to hide behind the DEI nomenclature. Instead, now it was like, hey, this is the direct impact of your actions or inactions, right? In many cases of allowing this mentality to fester. So my main question, to rewind all the way, right? Why is it always, it seems that this does not become an issue we as a society take in any seriousness until Jews end up getting brought into the conversation, and of course, always in a negative light. Help us out there, Zachary.
Yeah, so I think DEI in this context acts as a gateway drug, and what it's doing is facilitating the transition from grievances against the so-called, these hierarchies of oppression into actual anti-Semitism. And we are seeing the distinction between being pro-Israel and being Jewish to slip away. So just over the past weekend, for example, we saw two things happening in Michigan. One, that a sign commemorating the Jewish New Year, which was last year, was defaced with pro-Gaza and pro-Palestine language that also threatened the destruction of the Jewish people. And a group of Jewish students and a rabbi were held up at gunpoint. And that was the fourth violent attack on Jewish students at the University of Michigan that month alone. So what we've seen, though, in the past year or so is that we have seen Jewish students be punched, be knocked unconscious, be poked in the eye because they are Jewish. A UCLA male student last spring was forced, because he was barricaded, physically by anti-Israel protesters. He was denied entry into an academic building he needed to get into as a student because he was identified as Jewish for wearing a Star of David around his neck. And then Ilhan Omar, during the congressional testimony, opened up a photograph of the incident with a map and said this is not anti-Semitism because he could have taken the back entrance. If that doesn't sound like, separate but equal and racial segregation, I don't know what that is.
I just don't, I don't get where the parents, right? And as a parent myself, which still feels weird to say, but as a parent myself nowadays, I don't understand how so many parents can just be spectators in their own children's lives and either not help guide these kids to understand just the basics of right versus wrong, but also to be able to identify the bullshit when you see the bullshit, right? Because I mean, and this isn't to say that I agree 100% with, the values or the principles or perspectives of my immediate family. And heck, my dad and I have had battles beyond, that could easily go on this show. But like looking at, if you think you're supporting small farms with your coffee choices, think again. Many brands hide behind fancy packaging while sourcing cheap coffee beans. So you need to stop compromising on quality and on ethics. Clockham Craft Coffee was born from a desire for both transparency and excellence in the coffee game. They personally select every bean, ensuring top quality and fair practices. So experience coffee the way it's supposed to be: honest, delicious, and roasted with care. Plus, an exclusive offer for Brian Nichols Show fans. Use code BNS10 for 10% off at clockhamcraft.coffee. Link in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the show. Even that, there was like common sense, and I'm just going to use the common sense. There was common sense instilled in me, which thank goodness there was, because common sense nowadays don't seem to be too common. So when I look at the average parent who sees their kid go off to these institutions that they believe are supposed to help propel their kid to the next step, make them so they're going to be, the better version of themselves than they were and they went into college, so it can help them, obtain a good career or to set up their next step in life, meet the perfect person, to start their lives with, whatever the next step is that's coming from college, coming from university. How parents can sit there and objectively look over the past 50 years of what's come out of these institutions and then say, you know what? Little Susie should go. Little after she graduates college, Zachary, little Susie should go to college. Like, do you want to destroy your child's brain? Or at the very least, can you, if you're going to send little Susie off to school, like maybe she wants to be a nurse and she needs that degree. Okay. Can we at least prepare little Susie? Like, get her so she understands the world she's walking into. And I just see so many parents, Zach, and maybe this is something that you're seeing on campus as the editor-in-chief at Campus Reform, but like, it just feels like so many parents, they themselves were never really invested in understanding how things work and how we got to certain areas that we are today. And now when they're seeing where their kids are, they're like, how did we get here? It was never this bad when I was a kid. And it's like, oh, you're not helping your kid understand what's happening today is almost a direct result of you not understanding what was happening when you were a kid. And whose fault was that? I'm not going to say blame their parents, but like, you don't know what you don't know. And now we're in an era, Zachary, and here's my question, right? We're in an era where we can hop on a podcast. I didn't even ask where you're hailing from, but I'm here in the middle of Indiana. You're probably somewhere halfway across the country. We can have a real live conversation on, as we're recording, October 7th, a year after we were getting live streams of the insanity and the destruction and the bloodshed and the terror that was taking place over in Israel, right? We all got to see it real time without filters, by the way, which for better or for worse, I hope folks see that at least opens your eyes to what's actually happening out there without that, that nice, beautiful Snapchat filter that the media puts on any news story that they want to look good. So how we've gotten to a point where parents, again, they just were like, man, I don't know what I don't know, to now we know so much. It's almost, Zachary, it feels like it's malpractice not to know what's going on in the world. You have to actively avoid information. So I say all that to ask, are we at a point, Zachary, where we are going to see not a change from the institutions, which you're already saying we are, which is great, but rather a change from the folks I'd say matter the most here, the parents who are, what's that word? Oh yeah, parenting. Like, are we going to see a change in the home in terms of what kids are learning from their parents now that the information, I mean, it's everywhere. You can't escape it.
Yeah, and I think you're right to point out that it takes a lot of hard work to be this dumb. That does not come naturally to anybody. Before I answer the question about the parents, I want to just, for the sake of your audience, set the stage for what was happening up till before October 7th, 2023. So the 2 decades worth of indoctrination and brainwashing I mentioned, as that was going on, the language being touted as sophisticated and markers of intelligence that, were seen as or used to push anti-Israel, anti-Semitic tropes through academia was getting more and more dense and jargony on purpose, because the only people who would be able to parse it and understand it are people with PhDs. So parents on October 6, 2023, understood what their kids were learning in college much less than their parents were 22 years before that. Then when you see the protests erupt on campus, you have these uninformed parents, call their kids on their phone or text them and say, are you seeing this? Are you part of it? What's going on? It's very easy for the kids to lie because they were all in COVID masks. They pretty much camouflaged themselves completely, saying, oh, no, I'm not part of it. It was so easy for them to lie to their parents or to sanitize their involvement. So I think there's a lot of deniability and a lot of naivete on part of the parents in the last year. That being said, though, where we're seeing the most progress, the most promising signs of improvement in the situation is with the parents of high school students. High school students and their parents over the last year saw this play out, and they said, no, I'm not touching that. So the protests started in October of last year. December is when early admissions decisions went out. Harvard saw an immediate drop in the number of accepted students, even with early admission, because they had no interest in being part of such a tainted anti-Semitic school.
You'd love to hear it.
Yeah. We have seen billions of dollars evaporate in donations over the last year from parents as well as from people like Bill Ackerman. And we have seen depressed enrollment rates over the last year as well, as more kids are going to trade schools or to community college. And those going to 4-year degrees are now leaving the Northeast in California, which is the concentration of these anti-Semitic incidents, and going to Southern schools or going to big state schools in the interior, where there's a greater deal of tolerance and respect for religious and ethnic minorities, as well as more patriotism. No one is trying to torch the American flag down in the South the way they are, or to the degree they are in the Northeast. So I think we're in a shift as well, that by the end of the decade, the parents of the upcoming generation of college students are going to have a very new definition of what makes a good education and what makes a good school.
Zachary, I neglected to ask a question as we started things off today, because we talked about, we're recording here on October 7th, and all these protests started about a year ago. And it felt like when the academic year ended at the beginning of the spring here, this past academic year, it felt like that was kind of the bookend, right? Like, okay, Paulie, the Palestinian protester, he's going out and he's like, I'm going to fight injustice. Yay. And then he goes back to, upstate New York, and he's going to go be a lifeguard for the summer. Right. Is Paulie, the Palestinian protester, like, is he going back to campus here this year and picking up where they left off? Like, I candidly, I haven't heard of protests here starting out the academic year. I know we're like 4 to 6 weeks for some colleges, back into the swing of things on campus. So are we seeing protests this year? Is Paulie the protesting Palestinian? Is he just like out of work this year? What's going on?
Yeah, Paulie is back from Lake George and protesting.
Is he?
We saw Cornell and Columbia erupted in protests right away.
Cornell?
Yep.
That's like right down the road where I went to college. Oh, God.
I know. I'm also from upstate New York. Yeah.
Whereabouts were you?
Syracuse.
Okay, yeah, so we're going to talk afterwards because we have lots of commonalities up there. I went to Elmira, so same area, man. I totally get it. And by the way, I was having a nice conversation with my VP of Institutional Advancement asking, Brian, why did you go to your 10-year reunion? I was like, I have some thoughts, but different conversation for a different day. But talk to us, Zachary. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt there. Ooh, Cornell.
Yeah, but I think right now we're what I would call the eye of the storm. So, there's a hurricane now pounding Florida. So to use that metaphor, the part of the storm that is the center and gives it strength, but if you stand in it, is deceptively calm. So, and that's because what we have seen is that the tactics are always going to be shifting. So I don't think these protesters are going to redo exactly what they did the previous semester. What we have seen, though, is more isolated and more one-off incidents against Jewish students rather than mass encampments. Today, we are seeing a lot of protests, especially at Columbia University, as part of the Week of Rage. And I think what the students and the national chapter supporting them have been doing for the past 2 months is to try and push the envelope as much as possible and then figure out what they can get away with. So I think today is going to be a testing ground. So by the time people are listening to our conversation, we're going to have a much better idea for what the rest of the academic year is going to look like based on how the Week of Rage went starting today.
I know this is probably not a fair question to ask, but I just feel that we need to ask the question: What are the protesters hoping to accomplish? Like, what does winning look like for them? I mean, they're out doing this every day for weeks on end. Like, what happened? Like, how do you know you won? Do you win? Do they want to win? I don't know, Zachary.
It's a mixed bag depending on which zealot you have as your leader over there. But for a large contingent of the protesters, it's complete divestment from Israel. And what that looks like is having your university completely cut all ties with Israeli companies, research institutions, and personnel, which can include, divesting investments in companies that profit in Israel, or to kick any Jewish Israeli professors off campus. One thing people need to look for is what's going to happen at Northwestern, Brown University, and Rutgers later this month too, because those schools negotiated an end to the tent encampments last spring, and they were really not codified at all. It was a mutual understanding that the university would somehow entertain their pleas. And at Brown University, they're supposed to have a vote on whether or not to divest. So the board is supposed to be voting on divestment at some point this semester, but if they vote against divestment, as they probably will, the students will probably erupt. So they're not going to settle for anything less than that. Now, for the more ideal and, people out there who are even less centered in reality, they want to see Israel be wiped off the map. So they're going to keep protesting their local dining hall until Hezbollah or Hamas actually nukes Tel Aviv.
Zachary, there's a lot here that we I know I want to dig into, but I know we're already getting hard pressed for time. So we're gonna go towards our final thoughts. But I just want to take away from this, and maybe this will be my final thought. I got a lot of buddies, both still good buddies and buddies from yesteryear. And we've had reasons I've talked about many times in the show. COVID, that was definitely a big point of contention for a lot of folks. This issue, though, never really popped up because it wasn't really a topic we talked about during our tenure of back when we were in college. It was more social issues. It was the DEI stuff that we're talking about, right? Like, make sure that your buddy who's questioning whether or not he's a dude, make sure that he feels comfortable in his transition to a girl, instead of saying like, "Hey, dude, you want to talk? Like, let's have a conversation. What's going on? Like, why are you doing this?" And that was never allowed, right? And we fast forward to today, and I see a lot of these folks who I used to hang out with, talk to a lot, and just see that they have tacitly, maybe tangentially started to support this stuff. And this is where I get really concerned, because we talk about slippery slopes, right? And those are logical fallacies, Zachary, because it's a slippery slope argument. Well, slippery meets slope. We're here now, and I've only had to look 10 short years to see the progression from where I was and my friends were to where they are today. Now, for me, I've definitely taken a hard step back and said, hey, maybe we should not just do this whole go along to get along. Like, I was a libertarian who was very much in the live and let live camp for a very long time. And that's changed. I have entirely changed my live and let live perspectives because I've seen what happens when people just are like, oh, people live different lives. Oh, and we have to embrace all these different perspectives. No, you don't. As a matter of fact, I think it requires us in not just modern day, but it has for our history to acknowledge that there are certain cultures that are worse than others. And that's just the reality. A culture that values murder, rape, destruction of innocent individuals. I'm sorry, there is no context to have my back hurts right now, Zachary, trying to imagine the mental gymnastics I would have to employ in order to justify the idea that that's okay. And yet there are, in fact, students who are doing that today, and there are folks who I went to school with who are doing that today. So I'm gonna leave my final thoughts with this. Hey, Ron, my buddy Ron out there. His name is spelled R-A-N. We used to call him Ran because it was funny. He was from Israel, and he has for his entire life since he came to America, very much tried to fit in this live and let live mentality. And I know Ron has started to take a step back from the perspectives he had and he implored when he realizes that this slippery slope, it doesn't end, right? Like, there is no real end of the slope. The slope just keeps going. And I think he was starting to realize, I texted him when October 7th happened, because he has family over in Israel. He himself is Israeli, and he served in the armed forces there for 2-3 years. And just talking to him, I was like, hey, you okay? And I could tell it was a different Ron, right? Like his vibe was just different. It was no longer this. And at that point, he and I kind of had a little bit of a battle. Nothing bad, just a difference of opinion, very much so, from the COVID era. And there was a difference to him in terms of acknowledging that the people he thought were on his side, that were the good guys, right? This DEI perspective, the live and let live mentality, to see them, the folks he was agreeing with just a short few years ago with the COVID insanity, now just turning the guns, metaphorically and in this case in real life, towards him and his people. It was a huge slap in the face of reality. So as much as it hurts, Zachary, that we're having this conversation a year later, I'm hoping if we can, and again, I hate to even say that, can we find some good here? But the good may be that it's changing the way people approach these issues and starting to wake people up to the reality that, no, we are not all the same. We are not all equal in terms of our values, in terms of our principles. And in fact, we need to acknowledge that, right? That there are good values, Western values. I think we all acknowledge here in the Brian Nichols Show audience that Western values have predominantly been the best values that our world has ever seen. But also on the flip side, there is evil out in the world. There are bad people in the world. And instead of trying to say, oh, well, this poor person, they just had a terrible circumstance in life, that's why they did this terrible thing. Nope. How about this? How about we just say, hey, that person did a terrible thing, and there's no excuse. There's no justification, because as soon as you start to make a justification for the most horrific atrocities, God, I don't want to even begin to imagine what other horrible atrocities you could justify in the name of social progress. That's my final thoughts for today, Zachary. What do you have for us on your end as we wrap things up?
I completely agree with what you're saying. I think in addition to helping bring awareness to this issue and helping people understand the anti-Semitism that was always there, but they never wanted to see or couldn't see, I've been trying my best to, through my writing, through my TV appearances, show that American Jews who are predominantly liberal, what you've assumed to be true and what you've assumed to be real has not been the case, and you need to wake up, because they will not protect you in the end. The people who you thought were your allies were not your allies. You need to get some real politic and understand that Jewish history is 6,000 years old, and it is marked by violence and persecution. And the peace we've enjoyed in the last 50 years is an aberration.
So let's see if I got it here, Zachary. I'm going to be really proud of myself. I still have it. Oh, I don't have it. I was looking for my old campus reform stickers I got in 2015, back when I went to CPAC. 2013 when I went back to CPAC. So I was going to show you that I am a long time campus reform supporter, and you guys are doing amazing work. I've been a big fan of campus reform for a long time. So folks, if you want to go ahead and see what the heck is actually happening on these college campuses, and you're like, it can't be that bad. Oh, no, it is. And Zachary and his amazing team over at Campus Reform are going to unfortunately show you just that by peeling back the curtain so you can actually see it with your own eyes. It's like, what was that Sandra Bullock movie where Bird Box, right? And the guys are like, you're going to do that to folks, Zachary. And we need that to happen. So Campus Reform, folks, please go ahead and support them. And Zachary, with that being said, where can folks go ahead and find you if they want to continue the conversation, if they want to reach out? Give us all the social media handles and links there.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy to remember. Our social media handles for Campus Reform are Campus Reform for Instagram and for Twitter. And mine is for Twitter is at Zach Marsch, ZachMarsch. And people can enjoy my infrequent tweeting.
Infrequent tweeting. That's okay. I need to figure out how to do that. Apparently, I tweet a lot more frequently than infrequent. And my wife will tell me that as many times as possible. So with that being said, Zachary, this has been a great conversation. Unfortunately, I wish it was something about more upbeat and fun, but this is stuff we need to have these conversations, right? And to the audience out there, I know I see your emails, Brian at briannicholsshow.com. Email me, by the way, your thoughts. But I see a lot of the emails, and I had a lot of folks asking for more of the conversations around this October 7th anti-Semitic conversation, the college protests that were happening, and to really understand the why, right? We talk about solutions here at the Brian Nichols Show. It's not simply enough to just simply say problem and then leave it there. We have to offer solutions to these problems. And Zachary, you and the amazing team at Campus Reform are doing just that, specifically to this issue of how the hell our kids got to be these brainwashed I almost said a bad word. Brainwashed progressive goofballs over there on campus. But with that, we're going to put a pin in our conversation today. Campus Reform, all links for Campus Reform as well as for Zachary are going to be in the show notes. So please go ahead, give him some love, folks. And when you do, please let them know that you heard Zachary and the amazing team at Campus Reform over on the Brian Nichols Show. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Zachary Marschall from Campus Reform, thanks for joining us on the Brian Nichols Show. We'll talk to you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.